It was just after 1 a.m. on October 6, 1948. Ashgabat slept beneath fragile brick rooftops, unaware of the 10 seconds that would tear their world apart. A magnitude 7.3 earthquake crushed entire neighborhoods, leaving up to 110,000 dead, a tenth of Turkmenistan's population. But hardly anyone outside the region ever heard the truth. The Soviet Union's response was not just rescue, but a systematic erasure. Information blacked out, numbers manipulated, data lost. The censored earthquake that shook history isn't just a story of devastation, it's a warning buried by silence. How could one of history's deadliest disasters vanish from the record, and what was sacrificed in the cover-up? Ashgabat's streets, before dawn on October 6, 1948, wound through a city built almost entirely of brick and adobe. Rows of single and two-story homes crowded together, their walls thick but brittle, shaped by centuries of local tradition and Soviet-era necessity. Most families lived in shared compounds, multi-generational households, pressed side by side in dense neighborhoods, with little space between walls or courtyards. The city's rapid growth after World War II had only intensified this pattern, as returning soldiers and new workers filled every available room and outbuilding. Construction in Ashgabat followed the logic of the desert: mud brick for insulation, fired brick where possible, but almost never reinforced. Steel rebar concrete frames, or seismic bracing, were rare, reserved for a handful of government offices and the main railway station. Even these so-called modern buildings often cut corners, with mortar mixed from whatever sand or clay was at hand. Most residential blocks stood on shallow foundations, set directly atop loose alluvial soils that had shifted countless times before in Central Asia's history. Mass housing projects, promoted by Soviet planners, stacked more families into the same vulnerable footprint. Courtyards became gathering spaces, but also escape routes blocked by collapsing walls. Streets were narrow, winding between clusters of unreinforced masonry, each structure dependent on the next for support, and all of them vulnerable to the same hidden danger below. Ashgabat's hospitals, schools, and factories followed the same pattern: brick facades, heavy roofs, and little thought for what would happen if the ground began to move. The city's infrastructure, railways, power lines, water pipes, ran above and below ground, often without redundancy. There were no seismic building codes, no warning systems, no drills. The foundations looked solid, but in truth, everything rested on brittle ground. When the shaking began, these choices would decide who lived and who died. At exactly 1:12 a.m. on October 6, 1948, Ashgabat was jolted awake by a force no one had prepared for. A magnitude 7.3 earthquake erupted beneath the city, its epicenter just southwest near Garagaudan. The main shock lasted only 10 seconds. In that brief window, walls buckled, roofs caved, and entire neighborhoods collapsed in on themselves. The city's brittle brick and mud structures offered little resistance as the ground heaved and split. Within moments, the familiar maze of homes and courtyards was reduced to a shifting, choking mass of debris. As the dust settled, silence took hold, broken only by distant cries and the groan of twisted metal. Power lines snapped, water mains fractured. The railway, once the city's lifeline, was torn and impassable. 2 radio links survived the initial shock, one at a military outpost, another at the city's small airport. In the chaos, flight mechanic Yuri Drozdov stumbled through fallen beams and shattered glass, reaching the airfield's battered radio. He managed to send a brief, frantic signal, the first SOS to reach the outside world. That message, intercepted hundreds of kilometers away, was Ashgabat's only voice in the darkness. Every other channel had gone silent. Telephone and telegraph wires lay buried under rubble. No trains left the station. No trucks rolled in from the desert. For hours, no one in Moscow or Tashkent knew the scale of what had happened. The city was cut off, isolated not just by destroyed roads and broken wires, but by the sheer speed and violence of the quake itself. In those first hours, Ashgabat was alone, its fate hanging on a single, fragile signal in the night. No headlines ran in Pravda. Radio broadcasts skipped over the disaster as if nothing had happened. At the highest levels of the Soviet government, a decision was made. The world would not see Ashgabat's ruins, nor learn the true scale of the tragedy. Editors at TASS and central newspapers received direct orders. No coverage, no casualty lists, no mention of the quake's devastation. The official line, when it came at all, spoke of a minor incident, with vague references to damage and a death toll capped at 40,000. In reality, survivor accounts and later research point to numbers nearly triple that, as high as 110,000 lost, nearly 1 in 10 people in the entire republic. This silence wasn't just about hiding a disaster. It was about protecting the image of a modern, invulnerable Soviet state, especially as Cold War tensions grew. Acknowledging the destruction would mean admitting failure, not just of buildings, but of planning, leadership, and control. Information about the quake's impact was classified, casualty numbers manipulated, and foreign journalists kept out. Even internal reports were stamped secret, with details shared only among top officials. The press blackout delayed aid and distorted the response, leaving entire neighborhoods with no help and no voice. In Ashgabat, the silence was as deadly as the shaking itself. 9-year-old Saparmurat Niyazov stood alone in the rubble, his world reduced to silence and dust. Hours earlier, he had slept beside his mother, Gurban Sultan Eh. By dawn, she was gone, crushed beneath their collapsed home. Niyazov's father had already died in the war. Now, like thousands of children across Ashgabat, he became an orphan in the space of a single night. With every hospital destroyed, survivors staggered through the ruins, searching for help. Medical students and professors gathered in city parks and parade grounds, using shattered benches as operating tables. Surgeons performed amputations and set broken bones under the open sky, working by lantern light with whatever tools they could salvage. There was little morphine, sometimes none at all. People waited in lines for hours, some holding the hands of loved ones who would not survive until morning. The trauma ran deeper than wounds. Families vanished without trace, leaving children to wander the debris, searching for familiar faces. Niyazov's story was repeated in every block. A mother's name called into emptiness, a father's coat found in the dust. The earthquake tore apart the city's social fabric, scattering kin and neighbors, and leaving scars that would shape Ashgabat's future leaders and its politics for decades to come. Official records from the days and months after the earthquake vanished behind sealed doors. Soviet authorities locked away seismograph readings, engineering reports, and casualty lists. Some destroyed outright, others classified for decades. The railway started running again just 3 days after the disaster, but the data that could have explained how and why the city fell remained out of reach. For generations, scientists trying to understand what happened in Ashgabat have relied on fragments, foreign seismograms from Iran and the West, scattered survivor testimonies, and geological surveys of the rebuilt city. These pieces never quite add up. The blackout erased not just names and numbers, but also the chance to learn from failure. Modern researchers face a puzzle with missing corners. They map the Ashgabat fault using remote sensing and international data, tracing the scars beneath apartment blocks and schools. Each new study confirms the city sits atop one of Central Asia's most active faults. Meanwhile, Ashgabat's population has multiplied fivefold since 1948, pushing new neighborhoods deeper into high-risk zones. Today, more than 1 million people live where the ground once opened without warning. The lesson is unfinished. Without open records and honest risk assessment, the next earthquake could be even deadlier, not because of nature, but because of silence. On October 6, 1948, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck Ashgabat, killing as many as 110,000 people, nearly 10% of Turkmenistan's population. Soviet authorities withheld news, suppressed casualty figures, and sealed vital records, delaying aid and erasing seismological data that could have improved future safety. Survivors endured makeshift surgeries outdoors, while many orphans, including future leader Saparmurat Niyazov, bore the disaster's scars for decades. The official death toll remains capped at 40,000, but documents and eyewitness accounts point to far greater losses. To this day, many files on the disaster remain classified, and gaps in the scientific record persist. Modern researchers must rely on foreign seismograms and survivor testimony to reconstruct what was lost. Ashgabat's population has grown fivefold since 1948, yet seismic risks remain. The Ashgabat earthquake stands as a stark reminder: when truth is hidden, lives are endangered, and lessons remain unlearned.